Thank you very much for joining this symposium, this lunch symposium sponsored by GE Healthcare. So as you see, the topic today will be on artificial intelligence, new opportunities for a better healthcare. And well, let me first of all give you a bit of detail about the agenda. So you see, I will make a short introduction on the topic, and then I'll introduce the speakers. And today we have speaking for us Manuela Ferrario from Milan about artificial intelligence, a new tool for old problems. And the second speaker, and she will be connected remotely, is Susana Vieira from Portugal, Lisbon, speaking about fuzzy systems for personalized medicine in ICUs. So, of course, I'm a full-time employee with GE Healthcare. As a background, I'm an anesthesiologist and intensivist, and now I serve as the clinical education manager for GE Healthcare. And let me introduce the speakers. Manuela Ferrario, she received her PhD degree in biomedical engineering at Politecnico di Milano in Italy. She collaborated with several healthcare institutions in Italy and abroad. She was member of the scientific committee of the EU project Shockomics on multi-scale approach to the identification of molecular biomarkers in acute heart failure induced by shock. She is currently an associate professor at Politecnico di Milano in Italy, working at the Department of Electronics, Information and Bioengineering. She has authored and co-authored many peer-reviewed articles, and her research interests include data processing and information treatment for biomedical research, data analysis and signal processing, development of biological and physiological system models, machine learning, and data mining techniques for metabolomics data and multi-level data integration. The second speaker is Susana Vieira. She received her PhD degrees in mechanical engineering from Instituto Superior Técnico, University of Lisbon in Portugal. She was an invited teacher at the Erasmus University Rotterdam in the Netherlands, and in 2014 she was a visiting scholar at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Boston, USA. Since November 2020, she's an associate professor at the same institute in Lisbon, and since 2012 she's a senior researcher at the Center of Intelligent Systems. She has authored or co-authored many peer-reviewed articles with a high impact factor, and her main research area is soft computing and artificial intelligence. More specifically, she works on machine learning, feature selection, fuzzy modeling, fuzzy optimization, and meta-heuristics. Her research focuses mainly on the development of computational intelligence method for knowledge data discovery. So let me give you a brief introduction on, well, very short, on artificial intelligence. So first of all, the definition of artificial intelligence, which is the ability of a machine to perform cognitive functions as humans do, such as perceiving, learning, reasoning, and solving problems. And when we speak about artificial intelligence in healthcare, you see that these slides here summarize quite well the different fields where artificial intelligence may be and actually is applied today in healthcare. So you see we have two different fields, and one is clinical application, the other one is administrative applications. So on the clinical side, for example, you may have supporting population health management, or monitoring patients, or, for example, guiding surgical care, or predicting health trajectories, or recommending treatments. On the administrative side, you may have automating laborious tasks, recording digital clinical notes, you know, the EMR, the electronic medical records, optimize operational processes, and so on. So you see there are many, many fields of application today in healthcare. And just to give you an idea of what is the current status of artificial intelligence in healthcare in terms of, you see the trajectory of future demand on one axis, and on the other axis the current adoption. And you see that healthcare is situated in the middle, so not really falling behind, but also not leading in, and this is among other industrial companies or sectors, let's say. So we are probably, still in the process in healthcare of adopting or starting to adopt, in many cases, artificial intelligence in a fully developed manner. And well, with that, I would like to close this introduction, and I would like to stress that this is an interesting topic, of course, and an interesting session, and the peculiarity maybe is that in a clinical congress like this is, among an audience of physicians, intensivists, we have today 2 engineers speaking. And this is because I really believe that those figures of biomedical engineers or other data scientists, these will be in the future very, very closely needed in the research area and in the clinical area, in the ICU specifically, if we want to adopt artificial intelligence. There needs to be really a very close connection among clinicians and biomedical engineers, I believe. And with that, I would like to introduce Manuela Ferrario, who is the next speaker. And please, Manuela.
Okay, thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And in the talk of today, I will show you some example when machine learning could be an affordable and very useful technique to solve problems that still seems unsolved. I have nothing to declare on this. Okay. If we start from the definition of what is machine learning, that is the science of programming computers so they can learn from data, you may find several terms that are used interchangeably in the last year, like artificial intelligence, machine learning, data mining, statistical learning, or knowledge discovery in a database. Statistical learning theory is a framework for machine learning drawing for fields of statistics and function analysis. So statistical learning theory is at the basis of machine learning. So it's not something new, but it's just machine learning takes roots from statistics to develop new complex models. But the question is why to use learning methods. For example, you may use a rule-based approach if you want to detect anomalies in your acquisition systems, or, for example, false alarm in intensive care unit. One approach is to use rules. So you study the problem, define the rules, and use it. The problem is that the list of rules could be very long and complex, and it's pretty hard to maintain. Just to give you an example, you will probably use email software to manage your email. The spam folder may be guided by an algorithm of machine learning. So it's much easier to manage in such way spam email than to list of all possible emails that you received. But most importantly, the addition of new device or combination of different sizes, every time you have to rewrite the list of rules. This is a nice work that shows how to use rules to identify unreliable bits. It's a different approach because the authors are interested to find unreliable pieces of signals because they think that if there is an errors, artifacts in the signal, all the data index that you will compute afterwards will be not reliable. So they use a rule-based approach and they develop a signal abnormality index, and a bit is not considered normal if the bit does not meet all these rules. This is a different approach. The author use the ECG signal to detect arrhythmias, and they want to differentiate true arrhythmia against false arrhythmias events. And what they did, they used pulsatile signal like ECG, ABP and PPG in addition to the ECG recording, and developed more than 100 variables. And the machine learning approach tried to select the most important features in order to identify the true alarm against the false alarm. As you can see in the picture, in the figure on the left, you find that the true alarm is occur when you have good signal, ECG signal, and you can recover the same information from the PPG ABP signal. In the signal below, the alarm is classified as false because you can see from the PPG and ABP signal that you have normal heartbeats. The model will test, of course, for true alarm because you have to detect false alarm but not remove the true alarms. This is a very recent paper published this year that combined both approaches. So it's a deep learning model, and starting from the waveform, they use the convolutional neural network to develop part of the model in order to identify true arrhythmias versus false arrhythmia. But at the same time, the deep learning model was as an additional layer which comes from the rules I explained you before. So it's a combination of both approach with a new model that was effective in detecting false arrhythmia. I introduced a project here that I find very interesting, the ICU cockpit project, because in this project, the researcher collect data not only from traditional vital sign, but also video monitor. Why? Because the most, the principal reason of artifact in ICU is due to patient motion or due to the maneuvers the patient undergo by routine daily care from nurses or other therapy. So the idea is to develop an algorithm that try to figure out why the signal are noises, and by using the video monitoring to understand if they are due, for example, just for movement and not because the patient is deteriorating. A second context I find very interesting is the prediction of patient deterioration in general care. It's very important because the staff-to-patient ratio generally are low, and some important indicators of deterioration are not routinely collected, and mostly are not continuously collected. So one solution could be to use a rule-based approach, so to measure scores, or to develop early warning system, rapid response system. But this is a recent review. The conclusion is that there are no strong results that support such system. I think that the problem could be how the data are collected. But new technologies like wearable and wireless sensors to monitor continuously ECG, respiratory activity could fill the gap. I mean, the question is, can hospital work data be used to predict patient deterioration, give insight to ICU therapy by continuously monitoring this vital sign? In this work, the author compared 5 months of traditional rule-based approach with 5 months where they use a vital sign alert system. What they found is that there are fewer rapid team calls and a decreased need to escalate care to ICU. But in terms of mortality, ICU transfer, the results are very similar. The author states that one of the limitations of the study is a lack of granularity concerning exact cause of the rapid response team calls and death. And I think this is a good reason why these score and these rule-based threshold have several limits. In fact, we have many risk scores, we have many data, but it's pretty unlikely that one score can predict the deterioration of a patient for all possible causes. In this nice work, the researcher developed 3 different models, or better, they used 3 different approaches. One, the rule-based approach, just applying threshold and cutoff to vital sign by using the National Early Warning Score. They trained an algorithm to predict deterioration for all possible causes, and then developed a set of models for specific reason of ICU transfer. The problem is that each feature could be helpful to detect patient deterioration, but it depends on the reason of patient deterioration. For example, in this picture, in this heat map, you can see that in the red color, the high risk of patient deterioration, and blue color represent the low risk. For example, in the patients that deteriorate for heart failure, a lower sodium the lower serum sodium and lower mean arterial pressure are associated with high risk. But for example, the deterioration for respiratory failure are not related to these indices. So if we look at the higher end of the curve, we can see that, for example, the model that is developed with machine learning predicts deterioration of the patient much better than threshold and the rule-based approach. And if you look to the other indices, for example, for heart failure, the model predicts much better. Successively, the author developed a monitor system named COMET because the graphical representation of the risk of the patient is represented by a comet. For the risk of respiratory failure, that is a risk to urgent and planned intubation, and the risk of hemorrhage. They use a multivariate predictive model based on indices from continuous cardiovascular signals, and the head of the comet represents the risk of the patient at that moment, and the tail, the risk 3 hours before. The purpose of this monitor is not only to predict the patient deterioration, but also to give a visualization of the situation of all the patients in the ICU in order to drive the workload of clinical staff to the patient who really need much attention than the others. So in the next future, what I think is that we have a lot of data, and we have systems that are able to collect high-fidelity arterial pressure waveform analysis. This is an example how the high-fidelity arterial pressure waveform analysis is used to predict, for example, hypotension. But we can imagine that in the next future, the high-fidelity arterial waveform will be collected much more than now. And I think the arterial blood pressure waveform contains a lot of information that we cannot discharge. For example, in this work, the authors developed a method to estimate the incandescent time constant simply by a peripheral arterial blood pressure waveform. By collecting several minutes of arterial blood pressure waveform, you can construct a contraction signal, which is built by pulse pressure values placed at interval equal to the RR interval. And then with a simple input-output model, you can estimate the exponential decay, that is the time constant. In this work, we use this method to estimate the arterial tree characteristics in animals. We have 10 sham pigs and 10 septic pigs that are monitored up to 3 days after the start of resuscitation. And what we notice is that that mean arterial pressure is restored with the standard resuscitation therapy, I mean antibiotics, fluids, and vasopressor, but the animals, after 3 days of resuscitation, they are still tachycardic, but the time constant and the carotid arterial compliance does not recover, they are still low. And most interesting, at the end of the experiment, if we look at the waveform of the animal, the septic peak show a deep decay. So the exponential decay after the systolic peak is completely different than sham peak. And if you look at the picture on the left, the circle, the red circle represents the septic animals, the radius of the circle represents the cumulative vasopressor dosage. You can increase the dosage of vasopressor, but the systemic vascular resistance measured by the carotid arterial blood pressure are still low. They have not increased. So the question is, we know that septic shock induces profound change in the vascular tone. We know that we have the phenomenon of pulse pressure reversal. The pulse pressure in the periphery is higher than in the central aorta. So why not to study the different response to inflammatory vasoactive substances at central and peripheral vessel? And why not to study, for example, the wave reflection? There are many methods to estimate wave reflection and to characterize the different type of waveforms, because what it is matter is not only the amplitude of the reversal waveform, but also the time at which the reversal will arrive. And this could explain also the high rate of cardiomyopathy or cardiac failure in septic patients. Most interesting in the here below, there is a model to estimate, for example, the flow velocity from a peripheral arterial waveform, and then to estimate characteristic impedance of proximal aorta. But what we see in the next future, we may figure out to have additional information, not only vital sign, not only video monitoring, not only waveform analysis, but also proteomic, metabolomic, transcriptomic data. When we look at the metabolomic data of the same animal experiment I showed you before, we found that the arginine-ADMA ratio is still higher after 3 days. And the arginine-ADMA ratio provides information on arginine bioavailability for production of nitric oxide. So that's explaining why, well, probably it may explain why this animal does not respond to vasopressor or to the therapy. As regards phenylalanine and tyrosine ratio, which are associated to liver functionality, we found that in the cerebrospinal fluids, the alteration occurs 24 hours later than what we can detect in the blood. But most importantly, tyrosine is precursor of dopamine, which is the metabolic precursor of norepinephrine and epinephrine. So the integration of all these information could pave the way to new algorithms, but most also new models to understand the response of the patient to the specific therapy. So my take-home message is that problems like false alarm and prediction of patient deterioration are well known, but definitely solutions still lacking. Probably we need much more data or different models. In the next future, emerging technology, wireless and wearable device could pave the way to find reliable and affordable solutions in order to develop new models and new algorithms. Artificial intelligence is not a magic box, but a methodological instrument to help managing the even growing amount of data in terms of waveform analysis, other type of data like metabolomic, proteomics. We may figure out in the next future to have lab-on-chip microfluidic device to collect data that now are not currently available. Artificial intelligence paved the way to improve patient therapy by taking into account the entire history of a patient, even before ICU admission. With this new technology, wearable technology, you may have data from the admission to the hospital to the release of the patient. And next, maybe in the next future, to predict also a rehospitalization or deterioration of the patient after the ICU discharge or hospital discharge. And artificial intelligence could be helpful also to manage the complexity of information that could be very huge in terms of amount and types and differences among all the variables and features. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuela. Thank you very much. I think you touched very interesting points, and I really hope that there will be questions. We have a question and answer sessions at the end, and now I would like to leave the floor to Susana, if she is connected, and she will speak about fuzzy logic. So another technique of artificial intelligence, and specifically its use today for personalized medicine in the ICU. Susana, please.
Susana Vieira, and I have nothing to declare. I hope you are hearing me well. Typically, you can hear me talking about the challenges and pitfalls of performing artificial intelligence projects using healthcare data. But today I'm going to be talking to you about what is fuzzy systems and how you can apply them for personalized medicine for intensive care units. So we all know the trends nowadays on health information and health data, and we have data coming from different sources that have different structures, different types, and also different challenges. I've been working in collaboration with many hospitals and physicians, in particular from the United States and Portugal and the Netherlands. And we have been trying to use data that has already been used for diagnosing patients, from data from electronic health records, that in a secondary use, we can somehow extract knowledge and new information that will help to improve the care and improve also the decision-making of physicians. This data that we are using can be used for personalized medicine in the intensive care unit. If we think of a global population database where we can learn from the past treatments and provide new decisions for physicians using decision support tools that will help physicians take their decisions on new patients. And depending on the success of these new treatments, then we can refit this database with this new knowledge and again do the whole process again in a cycle. So we assume that using the advanced computational techniques and these large clinical data sets from the population in the intensive care units, you can identify specific features of the process of care, independent predictors of outcome of the patients, extract knowledge and perform near real-time monitoring surveillance, and build early warning strategies that help us deliver a better care. For that, we are using worldwide ICU databases. There are a few already. One of the most well-known is the MIMIC database from the United States, from the group of the MIT Critical Data. More recently, there's also the Amsterdam database. There are other countries that are trying to build their own databases, such as in Spain, Canada, or Brazil. And in Portugal, we are also trying to build our own. Why? Because the ICU is characterized by a very complex infrastructure, complex therapeutical interventions, and I'm sure that you know this much better than I do. And we also have different types of data, and this can be very challenging. Whenever we're trying to model the general population, we end up having models that can look very good, but in reality, they have many incorrect classifications. So many patients that are incorrectly classified. How can we try to avoid this, or at least improve these general models by performing some patient stratification? This is not something that is new, because physicians always perform patient stratification from a general population. Typically, there are subgroups of patients that are identified based on age, on sex, on comorbidities, and so on, different types of data. But the idea here is to use the data of their behavior on their stay in the ICU and group them by their development, by their evolution in the ICU, identifying different subgroups of patients by their characteristics and way of evolving in the ICU, and then build models that are specific for these subgroups. We do not know any universal method to discover knowledge. That is something that is a holy grail that we don't have. What we have is huge amounts of data available in our databases, but we are still drowning in information, but definitely starving for knowledge. That was true in 1982 and is still true today. It's very difficult to swim in the information that we have available and retrieve useful knowledge that we can work with. This uncertainty in the information that we typically have can be classified in two different ways. One, probably the most known, the aleatoric stochastic uncertainty, that is typical on the variability of populations, locations, and even measurements. And the epistemic uncertainty that is fully related with the information that we don't have. And this is really very difficult to deal with, the missing information, variables that are not measured, underlying conditions that we don't know, ambiguity of the delivery of care, because we don't deliver care the same way throughout the population. The communication or interpretation, or even the model structure. Sometimes we don't know how the disease evolved, what is the real structure behind the development of a specific disease. So I'm going to talk to you about what is fuzzy logic and how it can help us to manage uncertainty, especially in expert systems. I invite you to read this paper from Lotfi Zadeh, which is the father of fuzzy logic, and I'm sure that you will have a wonderful reading because he was a wonderful communicator. So the motivation here is how we can possibly simplify very complex systems, such as the ICU, by allowing some degree of uncertainty in their description, in the description of the problems. And how can we deal mathematically with this uncertainty? We can deal with it in two ways: with the probabilistic theory, stochastic, that we all know very well from statistics, and using the theory of fuzzy sets that deals with the non-stochastic theory. So by introducing some imprecision or vagueness in our natural language, we will not be losing accuracy or meaningfulness, and I'm going to show you how and why. So I have to start by making a short introduction about what is fuzzy logic. And I will start by talking about the way we represent sets. Typically, we use a characteristic function that is 1 if a given element belongs to a set, or 0 if it doesn't belong to a set. So if we think about how we define a tall person, and if you consider that a tall person has a height above 180 centimeters, we can define this characteristic function that you are seeing here. If we want to assess if a given person is tall or not, so John, for instance, is John tall or not, true or false, we just assess his height, and if his height is 180 centimeters, then John is tall and he belongs to the tall person's set. But what if he measures 179.5 centimeters? Well, it doesn't belong to the set of tallness anymore. And that is not quite fair. So how can we use fuzzy logic to define the so-called fuzzy sets that help us integrate John in the set of tall people without this crisp function, by using a graded membership. So an element belongs to a given set by a certain degree, and we define a function, a smooth function such as this one. Doesn't have to be a function exactly equal to this one. It can also be a linear function or a more complicated function, but a function that somehow defines in which degree an element belongs to a set. And here, for instance, John would belong to the set of tall people with the degree of 0.5. The fuzzy sets can be defined as a linguistic variable. In this example here, we have the definition of the variable age. And here we have the linguistic terms for this linguistic variable age, that is young, middle age, and old. And for each linguistic term, we can define a fuzzy membership function as represented here in this graph. And you can see that there's a degree of membership, and that some sets of some elements of the set belongs to two different membership functions at the same time, but with different degrees. We can also define more restrictive membership functions. In this example, for instance, you could define the infants that are inside the young set, but are more restrictive membership. So fuzzy systems manipulate fuzzy sets to model the world, and by doing so, fuzzy systems use rules such as this one that you're seeing here. If age of human person is young, then risk of heart attack is low. So here we have the linguistic variables and the fuzzy sets. And the first part of the rule is called the antecedent, and the second part is called the consequent, that comes after what happens in the antecedent. So the consequence of a fuzzy model can be a fuzzy set or a crisp function. And whenever we use crisp functions as outputs in a fuzzy model, we are talking about the Akage-Sugeno fuzzy models, where individual rules have a function, a crisp function, and then the overall output is a weighted average of the individual rule outputs. So by itself, these fuzzy models already have local models for each rule in the model. Fuzzy models are universal approximators, such as neural networks, and the accuracy typically increases whenever the number of rules in the rule base also increases. But when this happens, also the great advantage of interpretability of the fuzzy systems will diminish, will drop. I'm going to show you an example. Sorry, I'm going to show you an example of using ensemble modeling I don't know why this is happening. This ensembling modeling approach is based on the principle that instead of building a general model for the general population, as we see here on the left, we can build subgroup modeling by initially perform clustering to the patients, building different groups of patients, and then after identifying these subgroups of patients, we can build a model for each subgroup of patients. And having different models to assess new patients, then we have a decision criteria that will help us to determine which model is going to be used, or just weighted average decision from all the models. The clustering performed here was fuzzy C-means, which is a fuzzy clustering algorithm, which means that a patient can belong to more than one subgroup, because we never fall into one single cluster. The number of clusters is determined using validity indices for clustering. The modeling approach is used based on Takagi-Sugeno fuzzy models, so with local models, crisp functions for individual rules, and a model is built for each subgroup. Then we have to make the decision, and this decision can be made in two ways. Beforehand, trying to decide in which cluster the patient fits, or after, I don't know why this is happening, a decision afterwards, that is by assessing all the models. This was applied to vasopressor administration prediction, where we try to identify which patients would need vasopressors within 2 hours, and patients diagnosed with pneumonia and pancreatitis were chosen. Why? Because this will improve the outcome of critically ill patients if we do a timely administration of the vasopressors. The MIMIC2 database was used, and we used an initial set of 24 variables, and then 5 variables from these 24 variables were selected as the most important ones. And we could see that by using the ensemble approach with a posteriori decision, so using all the models built for the subgroups, produced much better results than just using the single model, both for all the features identified for the study and also the reduced set with 5 features. Here I present some results using the 5 features. So trying to understand if the clusters built for the patients were meaningful. We can see the distribution of patients throughout the 4 clusters identified, and we can see that the 4th cluster here is the cluster where more patients that needed vasopressors was falling. By looking also into the individual features selected as the most important ones, we can also see that some of these features have differences throughout the clusters. For instance, for heart rate, we can see that in some clusters we have higher values, and other clusters we have lower values, and 2 other variables the same. We also tested for pathologies across clusters, and we could see an increase of the number of patients in cluster 4, where more patients that needed vasopressors is. So this makes sense. So important insights that we can take from these clusters. For instance, in cluster 1, we saw that there were patients with higher blood pressure, in cluster 2 with higher heart rate and higher respiratory rate, and cluster 3 low heart rate and low SpO2, and cluster 4, which seems the cluster with more ill patients, as a low SpO2, low urine output, and high heart rate, which is also which also makes sense for most ill patients. We can also see the membership functions and represented against the CRISP values of low, normal, and high for each variable. And we can see that the membership functions are a little bit different from the CRISP values that we typically define for the physiological and laboratory variables of the patients. And this can bring more information. So the future and ongoing work is on extracting knowledge from patient group characteristics and obviously improve the way the patients are clustered using more sophisticated clustering algorithms that can handle different data types. So here are just some work done by the team, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Susana. Thank you very much. I think this is really fascinating, a new field of research, and I believe. Any question from the floor? I think you can go to the mic, or you can ask in the chat if you want. Well, let me break the ice. One of the first things that I have learned when I started reading something about artificial intelligence is the motto garbage in, garbage out. So that meaning that if you feed the algorithm with poor data, bad data, not the right data, you can only get out garbage. So wrong results, not what you are looking for, basically. I believe my question is this still the case today with new algorithms, also with the fuzzy technique? And this is also for Manuela if she wants to answer, but please, Susana.
Maybe I can start because of the fuzzy systems. That's true for all the algorithms, definitely. For fuzzy systems also, because they are also an algorithm, so they will adapt whatever you try to feed them. The interesting thing on fuzzy systems is that it gives us the ability of being able to extract information from the models very easily, especially if we try to simplify the models and have very few rules. But if we don't do it in a careful way, the knowledge that we can extract from them, it's garbage the same way. So yes, the short answer is definitely yes.
Yeah. Manuela, you want to go to the podium, please?
Yes, as I told you before about false alarm, one reason to research in this area was due to the fact that if you enter mean arterial pressure, heart rate values in a model, you want to be sure that the values you are entering are actual values and not coming from artifacts or noisy signal. So, for example, in the context of signal processing, the interest in false alarm or false values was motivated by this reason, for example. And secondly, it's more important to know the relationship among variables, because if you, this is very important, for example, for metabolomic study, when you have, for example, 50 patients and thousands of features. The idea is the feature reduction by taking only the features that are most important, because all the rest are noise, as useless. So the ideal model should contain only the features that are related to the outcome you want to predict. Otherwise, entering something else means two main things. You are at the noise, lower performing, but you ask a much more workload to the clinician who have to collect the data, or storage capacity to collect data at the same time. So having good models means a model with only the features that are important. All the rest are noisy or something that you are collecting that it's an effort, are reasonable. I don't know if I have answered.
Yeah, very well, thank you.
And can I add?
Yeah, please, Susana. You're welcome.
So I think, so what we hear in the past about what KISS, that we should always have the KISS approach, so keep it simple. It's still true today, although we hear about deep learning and very complex models. In reality, industry and also research has led us to the same KISS approach, because we are now talking about the explainable AI and how to retrieve knowledge from these complex models. And basically, this is exactly the KISS approach. Keep it simple, because we need to understand exactly what we are using in order to be successful, because if we don't understand what we are using, we are not going to use it anyway.
Yeah, and this brings me to the next comment that I wanted to give you is and also a question to you both.
I think there is a question, or not?
Sorry, because I don't see anything with those two spots. No, please take a microphone.
Thank you. My name is Martin Stott. I'm working in London. My question is, how do you convince the medics who are known to be very skeptical about accepting intelligence, and especially artificial intelligence, that the KISS approach, standing not only for keep it simple, but keep it simple and safe, that this is safe and that the output is going to be meaningful? Very simple question.
Yeah, very simple.
Very important.
Yeah, I think this is the big question today. So how do you translate this plenty of research that we have today on artificial intelligence into something really practical to be used daily in the ICU? But please, Manuela, and then Susana.
The most simple answer is, if it works, why not? But at the same time, I think that the model should not give you a complete answer, but a suggestion. What I mean, if you have a stratification of the risk of the patient, the model suggests you which patient needs much more attention than the others, but it doesn't answer to the question to what to do. I mean, at the same time, for the therapy, I think that by using artificial intelligence, they take into account a complex information, because pathology like sepsis are very complex, and the information you have to take into account is very complex. But the model, if it works, you should also understand why it works. And look at the data and the relationship among the variables, you can understand which variables are the important ones and why that is something from the pathophysiological point of view. Susana talks about as explainable IE, but the idea is that not only to use this model like a black box, but also to use this model in order to understand something about the pathology. I'll give you two examples, one very old. For example, the classical sodium-potassium pump was discovered by a model because the researcher made a circuit to try to explain the cellular membrane and found there is a capacitor. What is it? And then discover the sodium potassium pump. So the model of the reality can give insight on what has happened. I think that this could be the primary goal of this model. And I think from the company should be to give score, indices, other let's say, features that can be used in a clinical context. But I'm a researcher, so I think that the first issue, or what I'm interested in the model, is to understand something that can help in understanding what is going on in the patient or in this pathological context.
Susana, if you want to intervene.
Sure. I think I can add my personal view, which has been working for the last 12 years for me, which is instead of trying to solve what I think physicians need, is to solve what physicians come to me and say that they need, and also involve them in the whole process. Because if you're solving the problems that they want to solve, and if they are in the process, so in a multidisciplinary team, they are running the way things are going, they are understanding what is going on and how things are being built, and in the end, they have faith on the findings, because they have followed the procedure, they have followed all the work, they have given their insight into the problem, and most importantly, the project is answering one particular problem that they had. So I think this is at least one very good approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I really believe that, again, this, as I was saying at the beginning of this session, really, I believe that doctors, intensivists, biomedical engineers, and the company on the other side should really work very closely in research and also in clinical practice and designing systems and logics and way to, yeah, because I really agree with you. It must be kept simple but safe as well, and I know this is a concern. I'm a physician, so I know this is a major concern for doctors and intensivists. But I really believe that if we collaborate really side by side, this is the best way to overcome all our fears. Any other question? Otherwise, yeah. Can you have a microphone there? Please, a short question and short answers.
Oh, I tried to. Thank you for your information. Well, as a clinician, I want to know where to start. I mean, first we have a question in mind, for example, how we wean the patients from mechanical ventilator, and then we have all the data, and we just clear all the false things, and then we find what is affecting this our question, and we give it to you, and then you cluster it, and then you analyze all of it. I just want to have in clinical how we communicate with you. I just want to ask this.
With you, meaning the biomedical engineer, I guess. So.
Person, so you can communicate easily with us. No, but the idea is that, first of all, in my experience collaborating with doctors, clinicians, is to have a clear in mind the question. So, which is the problem? Which are the available technology? Which are the current database or data you can collect? And then to figure out which is the final target, so the outcome and which outcome, survival, not survival, or like in the phases system, it's sometimes the outcome is not so dichotomic easily. So the idea is to, first of all, to clarify the problem, and then search for the data that are useful to solve that problem. For example, a very interesting topic is the gut-brain axis. Wonderful, but how to measure the gut functionality? Which indices are necessary? Because the model needs to be fed with something that is related to the target you want to predict or to classify or something else. So first of all, the definition of the problem, the definition of the variable which are currently available and are easy to collect. Otherwise, if you want to collect your target is 100 of patient, but they are so rare or the data you need to collect are so difficult to collect, you take 30 years to arrive to the final database. And second, the model is an instrument, it's not the final goal. The model should be helpful in answering your question. So there is no one model or one type of analysis that fit for all the problems. You select the model or the approach according to the type of models. So, for example, if you have the big differences, when you have thousands of data, of course, deep learning is a fascinating approach because you take everything and the model tries to learn itself in order to classify correctly the patient. And the second approach could be, okay, I have selected patient that can be useful to answer my question, and I try to use model that try and explain what has happened. It's a much more pathophysiological approach. It's not, there isn't one answer. It depends on the problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We ran out of time, so I really thank you very much for those who were staying until the end here today. I think it was really a nice session. Thank you, Manuela. Thank you, Susana, very much indeed. And yeah, see you soon. I wish you a happy Congress.